Okay, so this is going to be a video all about squeeze keying. Now, usually when people talk about squeeze keying, they think of Iambic A and B mode, which I'll cover, but I also want to talk about Ultimatic mode, which I think is the best mode. So this is going to be a little bit of a controversial video. I know that it's controversial because I posted a poll on Facebook asking people what keying mode they used, and I got 100 responses, and 80% of them use Iambic B, so it's by far the most popular mode, and another 20% use Iambic A, and I was literally the only vote for Ultimatic. Now, I assume that most people watching this video already know about the Iambic A and B modes, but just to recap very quickly so we can contrast it with the Ultimatic mode. Of course, if you hit the left paddle, you get dits, the right paddle, you get DAWs, but if you squeeze, you get alternating dits and DAWs. Makes it very easy to do characters like a C. You just squeeze. Now the difference between A and B mode, I'll switch to Iambic B, is that it automatically adds an extra element, the opposite of whatever you were last squeezing. So here you can see I just let go during the last DAW and it inserted an extra dit. You know, the same thing, like to produce an R, you just do that. And you can let go during this DAW and it'll insert an extra dit. So I guess Iambic B lets you let go a little bit extra early. So Ultimatic is completely different. It's you can still get strings of dits, strings of DAWs, but if you squeeze, then the last paddle that was pressed continues to repeat. Now we'll get into the details, but just to give you a quick little teaser of what I'm talking about, for example, to get an X using one of the Iambic modes, you kind of have to slap back and forth like that. So you can see in this diagram what's happening. This is the right paddle being pressed in blue, the left paddle being pressed in red, so you can see kind of a timeline of the pressing of the paddles. So it was a press of the left, and then alternating with a press to the right, and then alternating back to a press with the left. Whereas with Ultimatic mode, it's a single squeeze, like that. So you can see that it was just a quick squeeze at the beginning. The DAW side was hit just ever so slightly before the dit side, and then it was just held, and then the dit side was let go to allow for one more DAW at the end. So it becomes a very simple motion. It's a single motion. You just can't get that kind of thing with the Iambic A or B modes. The same thing applies for P. If you want to do that in Iambic mode, it's something like that, slapping back and forth. Whereas in Ultimatic, it's just a squeeze and unsqueeze of just one side. So a lot of the characters in Ultimatic end up being this kind of squeeze and then unsqueeze motion, or a delayed squeeze motion, but everything becomes a squeeze, with the exception of just one character, and we'll get into that. So now we're just going to go through the whole alphabet and numbers and a few symbols and compare the modes. Mostly I'm going to show you how it works in Ultimatic, but we'll compare with the A and B modes as well. Just to get some quick things out of the way, the very simple characters like E, I, S, H, 5. That's just a matter of holding one paddle, or holding the DAW paddle. You can of course get a T, M, O, 0. The more interesting characters are when you start getting into squeezing. So, you know, an A is a simple squeeze, just like that, and you can see from the diagram that the left paddle was pressed just ever so slightly before the right. And of course, if you press the right first, then you get an N. And if you watch my fingers, you can hardly tell the difference. You know, looks very similar, but looking at the diagram, you can see just ever so slightly the DAW was hit first, and here the dit was hit first. So you get very used to doing this kind of squeezing motion. Obviously, when you do a squeeze, you're not going to actually press both paddles exactly at the same time. It's always one before the other, and you get used to just being able to press the one that you want first. Now, of course, with Ultimatic, I can get an A like this. I can just hold and get a W, or a J, or a 1, just by holding different lengths. Now, you can't do that with the Iambic modes. So if I tried the same thing with, say, Iambic A mode, let's see, I'll do it in Ultimatic first. There's W, and I'll switch to Iambic A. The same exact squeeze, you can see from the diagram here, that these are the same squeeze, but one produced a W and one produces da-da-da-da, which is an AA pro sign. Of course, in Ultimatic now I can get an N like this, like we just did. If I hold it longer, I can get a D, a B, or a 6, just by holding it different lengths of time. Now, I can't do that in the iambic modes. So for example, here I'm in Ultimatic still, I'll do a D. Okay. Now I'll switch to Iambic A and do the same exact motion. That produces an R instead. So that's the deal with the iambic modes, is squeezing always produces this alternating da-da-da-did sort of thing, which is pretty useful for example, doing a C in Iambic A is very easy. Just simple squeeze. Now, this is one character that is actually worse in Ultimatic. To get a C in Ultimatic, you have to tap the left paddle twice, because squeezing doesn't produce these alternating things. This is the one character that is worse in Ultimatic. Every other character, I think, is either the same or better than the iambic modes. Now, here's one place where I think Iambic B is worse than Iambic A. So for example, in Iambic A mode, if I want to just squeeze to get an A, that works fine. In Iambic B mode though, that same motion produces an R. And it's actually pretty hard to get a squeeze and release so quick that it happens all within this first element and doesn't creep into the DA. If it does at all, then you get an R instead of an A. So it makes it difficult to get an A without being able to squeeze very, very quickly, and at higher and higher speeds it becomes impossible. So in Iambic B mode you pretty much have to slap to get an A at high speed. So that's one strike against Iambic B. So in Ultimatic, again, to get an R was to just squeeze to get da, and then let go of the da side and get an extra dit. If I just hold longer, then I get an L. So it's exactly the same motion, just a matter of timing. And then vice versa. To get a K, let go of the dit side here, and to get a Y, just hold a little bit longer. Now, these work the same way in the iambic modes as well. Another class of characters are those that have kind of an alternate at the end, like a G. So in Ultimatic mode, I can squeeze to get this last dit. Just a little bit of a squeeze at the end. Very simple. Now in Iambic B mode, if I switch to Iambic B mode and try that, then look, instead of just adding an extra dit at the end, it adds an extra da, because that's what B does. If you're squeezing at the end, it'll add an alternate. So that means you can't execute those kinds of characters with a squeeze at the end. So that's another strike against Iambic B versus A, I believe. It means you can't squeeze at the end. You again have to slap. Something like that. So then that applies then to U, V, 4, 9. Same kind of thing. All these characters have just repeating dits or das followed by a single alternate at the end, which you can achieve with just a simple squeeze. Again, in A mode or Ultimatic, but not in B mode. So all of those characters are worse in Iambic B mode. Another class of characters are those that have kind of an interruption in the middle, like an F. It's like a string of dits. It's kind of like you're doing an H, but then you interrupt it with a da in the middle. Something like that. And that can be achieved again with just a simple squeeze in the middle. And that actually works in all of the modes. Same thing with Q. You can see that just a little squeeze in the middle causes that extra dit to be inserted. It's a nice little trick. It works in all the modes. One that kind of teased at the beginning, but is one of the distinctions between Ultimatic and the other modes, is ones that have kind of like an interruption in the middle, but it's a multi-element interruption, like the X, and you can see that that's just a squeeze here, but you can't do that in the iambic modes. You have to slap back and forth. The same thing applies for P, or some of the longer ones like question mark. You can see that's just a squeeze in the middle, whereas with the iambic modes you have to slap back and forth. Which isn't that hard to do, but again, you're relying on yourself to get the timing right here rather than the keyer, and it's just extra motion. And it's, you could be doing this with a single lever paddle if you wanted to. So I much prefer the squeeze method. It's a lot easier. Or the reverse to get a comma. Those are all easy characters with Ultimatic. The final class of characters, and then we'll be done with actually the whole alphabet and numbers and a few symbols, are those that kind of switch in the middle between dits and das. So like a Z. Da did it. And here again, you can see it's just a squeeze at the end. Just hold for the das and then squeeze to get the dits. Very simple. Whereas, again, with Iambic A or B, you have to slap back and forth. So then that applies to some of the numbers like 2 and 3 and 7, 7 and 8. Same kind of thing. And it can just be done with a simple squeeze with Ultimatic, or you'd have to slap with the other methods. So I would say that Ultimatic mode is the same or better for every single character, with the one exception of the C, because you have to slap the left paddle twice for that one. So that one is definitely a negative for Ultimatic, but everything else is either the same as the other modes or better. Every other character ends up being some kind of squeeze motion, either an initial squeeze and then let go of one side or the other, or a squeeze the entire time, or a kind of a delayed squeeze where you hit one paddle and then squeeze somewhere in there. But it's all about the squeezing. Now, between the Iambic A and B modes, I would dock the B mode for the way the A behaves, for example. The same exact squeeze produces an R, and it's actually quite difficult. There we go. To get your timing right and actually do the squeeze and release all within the first element, otherwise you get an R. Okay, and then there's the characters where you kind of squeeze at the end, like a G or a U, whereas in Iambic B mode, that produces an F because it doesn't allow you to squeeze at the end. It's going to produce an alternate. So that's one more strike against Iambic B. The real summary is Ultimatic, I think, is best. And Iambic B, I think, is the worst, which completely contradicts the Facebook poll, where 80% of people are using Iambic B. It's the worst mode. 20% are using Iambic A, which is not too bad, but Ultimatic is the best and nobody's using it. So I don't know what to say about that, but I personally am going to use Ultimatic. Now, one major drawback of Ultimatic is that it is unpopular, and so it's not built into a lot of radios. For example, the ICOM radio just does Iambic B by default, the built-in keyer. So if you want to use Ultimatic, you have to use an external keyer. Some things have it built in, like the Morse Reno has it built in. And of course, like WinKeyer and a bunch of other keyers support Ultimatic, but you probably have to use an external keyer. So hopefully this was fun. Hopefully the little diagrams made it easier to understand. And I'm sure that it'll be controversial. And if you disagree with me, then leave some comments down below. It'll be fun to read them. See you guys later.